Hi, welcome to the first part of This Week in Tudor History for the week beginning the 8th of February. I'm Claire Ridgway, author of several Tudor history books. Now today I'm going to introduce you to a chap named John, one of the many Johns in his family, and he's a man who turned down a title. I'm also going to be telling you about the postponement of Lady Jane Grey's execution and her 3-day reprieve. And I'll introduce an earl who seems to have been a bit of a Tudor bad boy. Let's start with the 8th of February. I'm taking back to the reign of King Henry VIII. But on the 8th of February 1545, Sir John Arundell of Lanherne died at the home of his nephew, Richard Roscarrock of Roscarrock in St Endelion, Cornwall. Let me give you a few facts about this Tudor man, who was actually the third John Arundell out of 9 prominent John Arundells in the same family. Sir John Arundell III was born in around 1474 and was the eldest son of Sir Thomas Arundell and his wife Catherine Dinham. His father Thomas, a Lancastrian supporter, had been attainted in the reign of King Richard III and his estates confiscated. But following King Henry VII's accession to the throne, the attainder was reversed and his estates restored. Thomas died just a few months later, though, leaving 11-year-old John as his heir. John III was made a Knight of the Bath in 1494, when King Henry VII's son, the future Henry VIII, was made Duke of York. And in 1497, he led troops for Henry VII against the Cornish rebels. He served Henry VII and Henry VIII as receiver of the Duchy of Cornwall from 1508 until 1533, when the office was passed to his son Thomas. He led troops again in 1513, this time in France, where he was dubbed a Knight Banneret. In 1525, John turned down the title of Baron, realising the financial implications of being raised to the peerage. In 1539, he was appointed to the Council of the West. John was married twice, first to Eleanor Grey, daughter of Thomas Grey, Marquess of Dorset, with whom he had at least 4 children: Sir John Arundell IV, Sir Thomas Arundell, Elizabeth and Jane. Following Eleanor's death, he married Catherine Grenville of Stowe, with whom he had a daughter, Mary. John was a devout Catholic and a real family man. His biographer, Pamela Y. Stanton, tells of how he cared for his pregnant daughter-in-law in the 1520s after his son John had abandoned her in London to flee abroad temporarily due to debt. He also provided for his daughter Jane, who never married. By the time of his death on the 8th of February 1545, John had substantial land and property holdings in Devon and Cornwall. There's controversy over his burial place. There is a splendid monumental brass to him and his 2 wives in the parish church at St Columb Major in Cornwall, but according to 16th century antiquarian John Weaver, there was an inscription in the church at St Mary Woolnoth which read, "Here lieth Sir John Arundell, Knight of the Bath and Knight Banneret, receiver of the Duchy," and then a bit missing, "Grey, daughter to Lord Marquess Dorset, who died 8th of February, the 36th of the reign of King Henry VIII. Interesting. I'll give you a link to a photo of the memorial brass which depicts him in full armour. It's quite amazing. Moving on to the 9th of February 1554, in the reign of Queen Mary I. This was one of the dates set for the execution of Lady Jane Grey, the former Queen Jane, but she was granted a 3-day reprieve. Why and what had happened between her trial in November 1553, when she'd been condemned to death, and this day? Well, let me tell you. Edward VI had named Lady Jane Grey, his cousin Francis Brandon's eldest daughter, as his heir in his dying days in 1553, and she'd been proclaimed queen on the 10th of July 1553. However, just 9 days later, on the 19th of July 1553, she'd been deposed by Edward's half-sister Mary, who was proclaimed Queen Mary I. Jane was imprisoned in the Tower of London, and on the 13th of November 1553, Jane, her husband Guildford Dudley, his brothers Ambrose and Henry, and Archbishop Thomas Cranmer were charged with high treason, found guilty, and sentenced to death. However, Mary made it clear that she wanted to be merciful to Jane, and the following month, Jane was granted more freedom at the Tower, and there was talk that the Queen would pardon her and release her to the Grey family home of Bradgate in Leicestershire. But two things dashed these plans for mercy. One, Jane's staunch Protestant faith. Leander de Lisle, in her book The Sisters Who Would Be Queen, which I highly recommend, points out that Mary I hadn't grasped just how strong and profound Jane's beliefs were. While Jane was imprisoned in the Tower, she was spending her time studying the Bible and writing letters and prayers and speaking out against Catholicism. In one letter, Jane damned all those who attended Catholic communion, and in a letter written to one of her former tutors, Dr. Thomas Harding, who had backslidden, in Jane's view, by turning away from Protestantism and embracing Catholicism, she called him the deformed imp of the devil and referred to the Catholic faith as the whore of Babylon and the abominable idol. She also wrote of how Christ came not to bring peace, but a sword, and that people should return again unto Christ's war. She was inciting rebellion. The second thing that dashed any hope of mercy was a group of Protestant men, including Jane's father, Henry Grey, Duke of Suffolk, launching Wyatt's rebellion against the Queen in early 1554. As news came that the rebels were advancing on London, Mary signed Jane and Guildford's death warrants, although she commuted their sentences to beheading. The date was set for the 7th of February, but it was postponed when news reached Mary I that the rebels had reached Knightsbridge. Then the date was set for the 9th of February, but Mary granted a 3-day reprieve. She sent her chaplain and confessor, Dr. John Feckenham, to visit Jane with the aim of persuading Jane to recant her Reformed faith and to join the Catholic fold. Was the Queen having second thoughts about executing Jane, or did she simply want to save her soul? It's not clear. Jane recorded her exchanges with Feckenham. They debated the path to salvation and whether Christ was really present in the consecrated bread and wine. Jane stood firm in her beliefs and told Feckenham that if he continued on his path with the Catholic faith, that he would go to hell. She prayed for him. Despite Jane's words, Feckenham requested a pardon for Jane. However, members of the Queen's Council, such as Bishop Stephen Gardiner, pushed for Jane to be executed. She was a Protestant traitor after all, and it was put about that rebels were also resurrecting Jane's claim in an attempt to depose the Queen. The Spanish ambassadors also put pressure on the Queen to act decisively. In a sermon, Gardiner pleaded for Mary to be merciful to her country and people rather than to a traitor. Mary listened, and on the 12th of February 1554, Jane's husband, Lord Guildford Dudley, was beheaded on Tower Hill, and Jane was beheaded within the Tower confines. I'll give you a link to my video on their executions. And we must remember, when we're thinking about Jane debating with Dr. John Feckenham and these letters that she was writing, that she was only about 16 years of age, an incredible young woman. Moving on to the 10th of February, on that day in 1564, in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, Henry Neville, 5th Earl of Westmoreland, died at Kelvedon in Essex. Neville was born in around 1524-1525 and was the eldest son of Ralph Neville, 4th Earl of Westmoreland, and his wife Catherine Stafford. His maternal grandfather was Edward Stafford, 3rd Duke of Buckingham. In 1536, at the age of 11 or 12, Neville was taken hostage by the rebels of the Pilgrimage of Grace to ensure his father's cooperation. In January 1540, he accompanied King Henry VIII to Blackheath for the reception of his bride-to-be, Anne of Cleves. He served Henry VIII as a soldier in his French campaign and as carver. He served as a privy councillor in Edward VI's reign and was made a Knight of the Garter in 1552. In 1553, when Edward VI was dying, Neville signed the letters patent naming Lady Jane Grey as Edward's successor. However, he swapped sides shortly after Edward's death, declaring for Queen Mary I, and bore the second sword and cap of maintenance at her coronation in October 1553. He died on the 10th of February 1564 and was buried at Staindrop. His only surviving son, Charles, became 6th Earl of Westmoreland. Neville was married 3 times. Firstly, in 1536 to Anne Manners, daughter of Thomas Manners, 1st Earl of Rutland. Secondly, to Jane Cholmondeley, daughter of Sir Roger Cholmondeley. And then thirdly, to Jane's sister, Margaret. By his first wife, he had a daughter, Eleanor, and a son, Charles. Now, a bit of trivia for you about Neville. Neville got into trouble a couple of times. In 1546, he was imprisoned in the Fleet due to debts from gambling and for allegedly plotting the death of both his wife and his father. He'd purchased a magic ring, which was supposed to give him angelic assistance to help him with his debt, but that obviously didn't work. Then in 1552, he was accused of plotting to steal treasure from Middleham and to rob his mother. He was imprisoned temporarily. Naughty boy, a bit of a Tudor bad boy, I think. Now, coming up in the second part of this week in Tudor history, later on in the week, I'll be talking about parliamentary acts that allowed a king to execute his wife and to execute people showing signs of madness, a miscarriage of justice, which led to a priest being executed in Elizabeth I's reign, an Elizabethan astrologer whose prophecies were, well, rather problematic, and a man known as William Waystall. Don't miss it. You can subscribe to the channel by clicking around about there. You can hit the bell to be notified as these videos go live, just so you don't miss out on any. You can leave me a comment and you can give me a like. Take care. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.